YouTube, so you can come and watch it again or share it with people that you think would appreciate it. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, can everyone see this PowerPoint screen over here? Okay, great. And then and it says recording. I see the little red dot. And so it's a lot going on when it's a PowerPoint and it's recording. So welcome to How to Supervise an Assistant. So we'll go ahead and get started with just some brief introductions. I think we know each other a little bit already, but for the YouTube audience, I think we'll just throw it out there. I'll just start with my intro first. I'm Sadie. I'm on the board at TRP. I do a lot of these workshops. I have a lot of background in scenic design and prop design, and I worked in HR for 7 years and decided I didn't want to work in HR. So then I went back to school for architectural technology, and now I'm assistant project manager and CAD drafter at a window company. That's my life story in like 2 seconds. So that's me. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Mandy.
Yeah, you bet. So I am definitely not as deeply experienced in the technical theater as Sadie is, but I am an HR professional. I have 11 cough, maybe more years of experience in HR, not to date myself, but I'm pretty sure it's more now. That might be hopeful and wishful thinking, but have done a little bit in the for-profit space, nonprofit, higher ed, had the fortune to work at a liberal arts college here in Asheville, have since moved on to the SaaS technology field, and just really love all aspects of HR in a variety of different industries and backgrounds. I started out in college doing theater. I was a theater nerd in high school, love it. I definitely came at it more from an actor playwright perspective. Met my husband doing Shakespeare in the Park way back in the day in Minneapolis. But I really so admire and respect Sadie. We actually worked together at the Ordway doing HR before she decided to take her life in a different path, and have really loved everything she's brought to Theater in the Round. My husband worked at Theater in the Round for a little bit. Love what they're doing in the community and the theater that they bring to the stage. And I think probably my greatest achievement is, again, my 2 children who are still alive. They are 7 and 9, and they too have been unfortunately bitten by that theater bug. So we're going to give them the skills to do it well and hopefully get paid for it.
Excellent. So that's our little brief intros, just so you kind of know who we are and why we know each other, why we think we can talk about this subject as well. So for the 2 folks that are on the call, Linda and Mary, I just want to kind of turn it over to you just for a second, because I want to hear kind of from both of you why you're kind of interested in hearing this presentation, or what you're maybe hoping to get out of it.
I'll start. Well, I'm a theater person too. Many years at Theater in the Round. I guess just the title intrigued me, and we've talked a lot about mentoring people, and I'm interested to see what you guys have, because it's a skill for sure that maybe theater people don't always think about. So I'm interested to see where you guys are going to take it. So.
And I'm Mary, and I'm a graphic designer who's sometimes put into an art director position or a mentor. And just, yeah, again, like Linda said, the title intrigued me. I'm just looking to get any other additional information or guidance from a creative perspective on working with other people.
Great, excellent. I love that you have that background in the graphics to kind of pull into this as well, because I do think it's transferable skills to multiple things. So we kind of geared this presentation towards directors and designers. I know for myself, I've worked with design assistants pretty much mostly in set design. I don't think I've had an assistant for props, because that's a different kind of beast to manage. And I think assistant directors are a common thing that exists in the world, and I see commonalities between the 2. So we thought that would kind of be kind of our target audience for this presentation. And I think one thing to just kind of point out, like from the top, is that all theater work is kind of inherently project-based work. So compared to other like work relationships, the time frame of this assistantship is usually a defined time frame, whereas If you're in a workforce, you might be working with someone for years, which is a different, I think there's transferable skills, but I think it's a different approach. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Mandy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sadie, just the sort of time boundedness of theater and thinking about it maybe in that sort of project sense. Because I think that are very similar, and there are things that are different because there's like a very defined beginning and end. And I think, you know, Mary, to your point about like being in that graphic design and maybe even graphic art role, just having a lot of skills that you could bring to larger, longer term projects would be helpful, but also just knowing how to maybe run a project and mentor and coach folks in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And we kind of wanted to put a mix of things into this, some things that are more so concepts to reflect on, while hopefully also giving you some tangible kind of tools to walk away with as well. So kind of the first kind of thing that we like to review whenever we're talking about supervising or leading or managing is first you have to know yourself. And I think to know yourself, you have to be inherently self-aware. Mandy, I don't know if you have anything right off the bat to kind of say about that.
Yeah, so I do a lot in the world of HR, just having led teams and folks, and then done some training for supervisors and managers and executives. When we talk about like self-awareness and communication style, problem solving, there are a lot of tools out there that you can use to like better understand your preferences. One tool that I like a lot, and I think there are pros and cons to any tool, right? But there's the Myers-Briggs, which you may have heard about. We call it the MBTI. I think it's a good tool. There's strengths finders. There's just like a lot of those that really ask you to turn some of that reflection internal and think, okay, like what is my preference? And we're all adult humans who can exercise the other side of the muscle, right? So I think sometimes we even forget what our preferences are because we get so good at navigating environmental settings that we can think, oh, I'm a really good written communicator, but when it comes down to it, maybe your preference is verbal communication, and just understanding that, because when you get in those moments of high stress or high stakes, you're going to kind of revert back to that preference. So knowing that and being aware of that, I'm like, okay, my preference is verbal. When I get stressed, that's what I do. I need to make sure my team is aware of that, or my assistant is aware of that, so that we can just be on the same page, I think can be really helpful. I'm going to drop, Sadie, I know I sent this to Greg, but I think I sent it late. It's on me. I was going to drop a link in the chat for Mind Tools. And they have some fun free assessments that you can do to think about your own leadership style. There's like, you know, they think of it in 3 buckets: authoritative, a participatory leadership style, so kind of collaborative, and then more delegation. And all 3 are really good and all 3 are really important, but it's just like, what is your preference and where do you go?
Yeah, and I think we kind of bulleted out a couple of subpoints under self-awareness, just in terms of if you're not sure where your self-awareness is kind of at, there's a couple of things that you can start actively doing to raise your own self-awareness about, you know, like it is taking, you know, quizzes like this, but I think that there is also, you know, actively seeking feedback in your environment. And then I'm just looking at the PowerPoint here, engaging in self-observation to stay aware of feelings. I know that that's a big one for me, that has taken me years to kind of hone in on, to be like, oh, this is how I'm feeling right now. I have felt this way before. What is that telling me about myself? That's a big one in my own life. And I think also when it comes to any kind of supervisory relationship, just having that layer of awareness of like inherent power structures, because whenever you're supervising someone, like you're the subject matter expert. So how does that heighten your self-awareness? And that kind of a power dynamic, I think, is really important as well. And then, because I think, Mandy, you hit on a little bit of like knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And I think particularly when it comes to any kind of creative endeavor, I think that that is really important as well. I know for myself, I don't do abstract design well at all. So in no world would I ever take on an assistant where I'm doing abstract design, because I'd be like, I'm floundering and I'm just gonna flounder and you're gonna flounder with me, and that's what you're gonna learn. And that might not be what they want to learn. So I think that knowing your strengths and weaknesses is always going to set you up to be a stronger leader, because I think that's also a skill that you can then pass on to an assistant as well, to pass that kind of self-awareness along. So then it becomes a cycle, a positive cycle, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then I think also, particularly when it comes to like theater specific projects or any kind of creative projects, I think thinking ahead of time of like what are particular like sections or portions of a project that you're comfortable collaborating with. Because I think in any kind of creative environment, like I know for myself, there's some things where I'm like, I will not give this up because this is my idea and it's my little baby to, watch. Maybe would not be a great thing to be like, here's my baby, no, take care of it. And I'm just gonna like micromanage you while you do that. And I think that that's kind of part of that self-awareness as well. So, and then Mandy, did we have other resources we were gonna email out, or was it mainly this link?
This link, but I can also drop my email in the chat if folks want, more tools when you think about how do I uncover my own strengths, my own maybe areas of opportunity or weakness. Because I think you had a really good point, Sadie, about like, if you're taking on something new, that's not the time to take on an assistant as well, right? If it's something that you're not good at, it's brand new to you, it may be something you flounder in, like, you're not going to have capacity to mentor, coach, or supervise, or bring somebody along on that journey. And so I think it's just being aware of that fact, and happy to send other, assessments or toolkits out there. Like I said, there are a million things that you can do to kind of better understand you. And a lot of that comes with just doing it too, is the hard thing, right? Like you just got to do it and learn and ask for feedback, be open for that. And I think the creative process can be a little challenging because there's a lot of heightened emotion in that. But I think at the end of every show project, just being able to be like, okay, what went well there, or where could I have improved a bit, and remembering that feedback is really important.
And also, just to plug Mandy a little bit further on Myers-Briggs, she's really good at it. I think one of my favorite memories from the Ordway was watching Mandy give the Myers-Briggs training to different groups of people, and you could tell that she would like change her style based on the people that were in the room. Like she would talk to a group of introverts differently than a group of extroverts. And it was really cool seeing her give the same presentation to different people so that it lands the best. So take advantage of anything Mandy will send you. So
I'll be happy to send.
Yeah. And then kind of plugging along, I think there's definitely a time commitment that comes along with any kind of assistantship. And I think for it to be fulfilling on both sides, you have to kind of honor that time commitment that comes with that. But I think in the best kind of scenario, you both learn from something. I don't know, Mandy, if you have anything to add to that to kind of round that out.
Yeah. We're actually talking a lot recently at my company. There's been this need for interns. And I keep thinking about this, and it harkens back to my days with Sadie as well at the Ordway and our interns. But we've had a lot of conversations with managers who are just like, I'm so busy, I just need another body, give me an intern. And I'm like, no. This is going to actually be more time. You need to invest. I need you to like be involved in this. We can't just have this be a body that you give work to. And I think it's the same is true for an assistant in this sense, because you're going to need to answer questions, be available, be there as, that supervisory role. So it's not just, oh, I guess I'll do this and it will take some work off my plate. It's like a commitment. But to Sadie's point, like you learn so much out of that. I feel like I learn so much when I have an intern or anybody working under me, with me, beside me. Because they're going to have a different perspective. They're going to bring different experiences. They're going to think about something differently and maybe have just a really beautiful approach to something that you might not have thought about. So I think if you commit the time, you're going to get it back in spades for sure.
Yeah. And I think I always think of it as carving out time ahead of time. So making sure that you're setting the time aside to like check in. Because to me, if you put, an hour in, you might be able to get, 6 hours of work that's productive out of your assistant. So I think it can be easy, I think, in theater to be like, oh God, I can't like spend another hour on this. But if you can spend that hour to help guide that person and develop them better, it ultimately ends up being more helpful in the long run too, even though it can feel really hard to find an hour in a theater schedule. So,
Yes.
all right. And then kind of moving along, I think it's important to talk about the difference between leadership versus management, because I think it takes both skill sets to be a successful supervisor of anyone. So I usually think of leadership as more visionary, more kind of concept driven. Decisions are being made. We're thinking strategically, philosophically. I know that Mandy will have things to say about this for sure.
Yeah, and I like that like inspiration, that sort of high level, right? Those folks are the ones that have identified themselves with their self-awareness as like big picture. They can, maybe see the end goal before some folks who are more involved in the day-to-day might be able to. So it's definitely that like conceptual, large picture strategy, inspiration piece, I think is very much a leader.
Mhm. And I think with directors, it's really easy to think of how is a director a leader, because I think directors inherently, are leading a whole cast and a whole production team. I know some of the best, best directors do have that leadership quality, because you got to get everyone behind you to get behind your concept. So I think most people just kind of intuitively think that, directors are good at this. And I think designers, this comes as kind of like you're following the leadership of the director, but you're still leading your design. Because I know like one example is just that I just included here is like the discussion on color palette. And for me as a set designer, how much sometimes the set is setting the atmosphere, sometimes for the other designers as well. So it has that like trickle down effect, as you kind of start a production, it kind of starts with leadership and then maybe transitions more into management as you get more into the execution phase of things.
That world building too, right? Say like, so you're building the world. I think we've all seen a production where you're like, what is the one actor who's not in the same world, or the one design piece that's not in the same world, or why the heck was that? So I think it's that idea of like building a cohesive world that we can all play within, and then everybody understanding what their role is in sort of executing that concept and vision.
Yeah. And then I usually think of management as more like the tactical operational execution side of things. So it, like in the example of leadership, if you're like deciding the color palette, as a leader, the management is like going and picking the fabric and the paint and actually getting the things that support the leadership as well. And I usually think of management as, you're doing the brass tacks of, making sure stuff gets done on deadlines and budgets. And I think that when it comes to theater, I think that there's kind of two different ways you can kind of conceptualize projects for assistants. I think you can usually think of, while you're thinking of, what are the things that have to get done? There's the day-to-day, there's kind of the what has to get done every day, or what are the things we have to chip away at each day? And then what is the overall arc of the project? I usually think of projects in two different buckets like that. And I know for myself, that's how I always think of projects in an office setting and in a design setting, because I'm always like, there's stuff that always has to get done every day. And then there's like, what's the overall point of what we're trying to get to? So
I think sometimes you're wearing both hats, right? Depending on the production size, or, to Sadie's point, you're probably like organizing your leadership concept, big picture thought, and then execution management. And I've also noticed, I'm sure this is true, it's it's been a while since I've done theater, although I do think coaching my 9-year-old on her monologue she had to give counts a little bit. But something I see often in the business world, and Sadie, I'm sure you have seen this as well, is there's that inherent tension between the big picture, conceptual, strategic, and the execution, tactical doing. And sometimes that's just because folks want to feel appreciated for their role and their piece, right? Like it takes that leadership, that concept, that overarching world building, and it takes someone who can do it and do it well and execute on time and in budget, right? It takes both of that. And I think if folks don't feel valued for the work that they're bringing to the table or their role in the final, product, it can feel really, really like there's a high tension or there's lots of conflict. So I think just understanding that, and that maybe sometimes when folks are frustrated or they're like, I don't think this is going well, it could be just listening to them, kind of valuing what they're doing, and making sure that they feel like they're, they understand the why and the how, and then they can all work towards that.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like Casey joined us. Hey, Casey. Her audio is still connecting. Yeah, I think, Mandy, that's a great point, because I think sometimes in HR you can find yourself in a situation where you end up hearing both sides of the situation, and sometimes it's like one side's like, it's so hard, and the other side is like, it's so hard, and you're like, but that's the great thing, is you're all working hard, so that should be a unifying thing. And so when that kind of tension comes out, it's usually a symptom of a lack of listening, which isn't surprising. But yeah, any kind of questions between management versus leadership?
Well, I think in terms of a director, but I'm also right now in the process of training a new hire in at work. And she's only been there 2 days, but the first thing I did was figure out what her strengths were and skill level, so that I knew how to communicate to her rather than forcing her to learn who I was right away and how I worked. We're still working on that, but it isn't two isolated people. You have to be able to kind of read the room, read the person. And when you were talking about people's disappointment within certain projects, that speaks to what motivates certain people. Some people are motivated by the end result. Some people are motivated by tomorrow's success. So you have to recognize that too. So yeah.
That's so key, Linda, that motivation. Like I think setting the stage like you did with your new hire, like how do you need to get information? Because again, like Sadie and I see this all the time in the world of HR. Everybody says the same thing in different ways, right? Like we're all speaking sometimes the same language, but it's so vastly missing because everyone's like, oh, that's not fair. That's not fair. I'm like, you're both saying it's not fair, but your understanding and definition of fair is different.
Yeah.
So it's setting the stage early and often can be really, really important.
Yeah.
Which really segues well into our next slide, which is setting expectations, because the takeaway is it takes both leadership and management. I think we kind of hit on most of this, but I think when you have that good balance of leadership and management, you're going to kind of inherently foster an environment of respect and collaboration. And I think one thing when Mandy and I were talking about when we were prepping this presentation is you can always tell your leaders and your managers during tech week if you're unsure of who you're working with, like, because I've seen some directors where I'm like, you're a leader, not a manager, and then I've seen the reverse and I'm like, oh, those are very different tech weeks when and even in myself too, especially when you get into that kind of tech week mode. So I just always thought that that's a great thing to just kind of reflect on, because that's usually when you're like, well, I'm not going to work with you again, or I am going to work with you again, kind of based on tech weeks sometimes.
And you've got those folks that work really well and know those. I have a college production that I keep thinking back to where the director, very much a leader, she was like, these beautiful giant silks are just gonna fall from the sky. And in her head, she's like, this is gonna be beautiful and poetic and symbolic and amazing. And the TP was like, Donna, you and I have to have a side conversation. Like, how am I gonna do this, and with what money, and where is it, what? So you can, like, if you're leaning into your resources well, I think it can go beautifully.
But yeah, getting into setting expectations, because I really think that that is kind of the groundwork that you lay for yourself in any situation, whether you're a director, office, designer, anything like that. And I think I do think that setting expectations does take time to practice, because when I first started supervising, I think it was interns particularly, I was like, I don't know, you show up, like, what else is there to say? And then it was like a couple of times where it was like, oh, I could have told you that really upfront and we could have avoided some of this. And I think particularly in theater, setting expectations, scope of work is really important, I think, on all aspects of production. And I think, you know, Linda and Mandy, you were kind of getting into some of the setting expectations thing in just a couple moments ago. But I think the most tangible way of setting expectations is literally setting goals. I know we've all heard of SMART goals. I got my formal SMART goal training from Miss Mandy herself, because there's SMART goals and then there's smarter goals. So I don't know if you have anything to kind of add about goal setting, Mandy.
Yeah, I think something that I've learned just, again, in the decade plus of leading people is, to Sadie's point, like, we can all think, oh yeah, it's clearly articulated, but if you don't actually formalize that conversation, to your point, Linda, like, you had a conversation with your new hire to say, how do you learn, or what's your communication style, where's your skill set at, like, let's do a little bit of a gap analysis to see what you know and where you're at. Like, if you don't formalize that somehow, and it can be as easy as a meeting, like, we're going to grab 30 minutes, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about goals, we're going to talk about, you know, are they specific, are they measurable, are they attainable, are they realistic, time bound? I always like to add from the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, the or the E. So is there a lens of inclusion there, which can help us think about different perspectives or differences of ability? So are you articulating those goals in ways that even people who might learn differently or communicate differently or make decisions differently, how they can hear that and have an opportunity to engage in the process with you and say, you know, I feel like I'm really good at X, Y, and Z, and I really want to take that on in this production, but I'm really not good here. So maybe I just listen and I watch and I learn. I think it's formalizing that conversation can be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think it's the first conversation, and then it's the commitment of pre-scheduling check-in meetings. And I think of a check-in meeting as tying back to that first meeting. I know when I'm actually like supervising someone in an office setting, I will like write it down, and then there's a form, and then we will fill out the next 30-day form. Like, that's a very like literal way to do it, right? Like, that's a formal program of like, here's my goal, this is what we talked about at 30 days. And I don't think every like theater production needs to be like that. That's more for like personnel files to make sure you actually did it. But like, check in, you know, when you pre-schedule it, I think the hardest thing is being disciplined to make sure you're truly talking about that, and not being like, so this just happened in rehearsal and I know we're supposed to do our check-in, but let's do this instead. That's, I think, where the discipline of it comes into effect, is knowing that you carved that time out to make sure the goals were met. Because I know for myself, like, I've gotten to a point with an assistant that I have to like start my conversation with like a design assistant of being like, what do you want to get out of this experience? Because I know what I think is important, but that's how I've learned. And my path of design can be very different than someone else. And that's what I always have to keep in my forefront when I'm leading someone, is like, this is what you said you'd get out of it. Is that still what you think you want? Because it can change too. It doesn't always when you're in a defined time frame. But I think it's important to set aside the time for the conversation. So.
Well, I
And I
think
think
there's
Sadie,
I was just going to say I keep hearing the word in my head, flexibility, and kind of a learning curve, no matter how many plans you set in the beginning, that you need to be flexible, but not so flexible that nobody can count on you. You're just, at a moment's notice, you're changing direction. So there needs to be that inherent acceptance of saying, if something else comes along, I need to be able to move into it and move forward with it. Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that's extra true in a creative project, because
Yeah.
I think that the project itself can inherently change.
Yes.
Like for me, like one of my best examples of like a design element just like changing through a process was actually like Comedy of Errors. Like I had this idea of like, because we did Comedy of Errors on the beach. It was super fun. There was like a tiki hut. It was great. There was rainbow colored sand. I loved it. I put my little wiener dog in a swimsuit and brought her to Tech Week. That was fun too. But there were this idea of like these matching tiki torches, and like this idea of like something illuminating was from the ceiling was like the through line, but like what those tiki torches were changed at least 4 times by the time we got to Tech Week. So like inherently like stuff changes, right? Whether it's like concept or like execution, like that's where flexibility comes in too.
Yeah.
So
yes, yeah. And I think Sadie, you're really good at this, the like asking, what do you want to get out of this? And then instead of just, I think that flexibility piece, Linda, is huge. Instead of just being like plow ahead with what you initially wanted, it's like actually listening to the person, like, oh, okay, maybe I have to let go of something and give you a piece, because that's really where you want to grow and learn. And that can be hard, but I think those are the best supervisors, or those folks that have some framework, but some flexibility.
Mhm.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think coming back to learning styles for a second, I know we've touched on this, but like delving a little bit more into this, I think that this is also something that takes some practice as a leader to really like a leader and a manager to really know like what do different learning styles mean. Because like I've been in different situations where you can like I've had people be visual people where it's like, no, I need to see you actually like do the paint thing, or like I need you with me step by step. The example that I give is model building, because anytime I have an assistant set designer, usually the first conversation is, do you want to learn about model building? Because if you do, that's an easy one. And then like how you go about the actual process of like building the model is like, well, here's some foam core and figure it out. Or it's like, here's some foam core and a template. Or can you show me a finished one and tell me about your process? Like there's so many different ways, like through learning styles, that you can achieve the same thing depending on what works best for the individual. So I don't know if you have anything to add about learning styles, Mandy.
Yeah, I just think there's so many, right? We talk about to your point, like visual, audio. I am so bad at like just being handed a documentation and told to run with it. Like I'm a much better, like, let me sit in shadow, let me watch and hear, and then I can take my learning away from that. So I think it is just like asking the person, what do you want? How do you want to get there? Like we've got some, again, we know what the end product is. We want you to build a model. We know kind of that's what our goal is, but I can help you get there a couple of ways. Do you want me to be really hands off so you can, learn and fail and learn again? Or do you want me to like give you a little bit more guidance? What would help that individual, I think, is really, really important.
It's like telling a designer, well, I want it blue, and just leaving it at that. And that's not communication, because blue to me is different than blue to Sadie. So yeah.
Yes.
As per my wall demonstrates.
Yes, right.
I think it's always important to talk about kind of expected time frame or expected time commitment, because I think that's always gonna frame up your conversation. So like usually I say, what do you hope to get out of this experience? Question 1. Question 2, how much time do you want to commit? Like, can we pair those things together and actually make it work? Is usually, and sometimes you can like have conversations with someone about like what they're hoping to get out of an experience before anyone's committed to a project too. Like that's kind of a best case scenario in some ways, to learn some of those things before someone's like committed to a project, because then it gives you some time to percolate on things a little bit. So, and I think also touching back a little bit on learning styles, but also kind of like a blend of like, what are you hoping to get out of this? I usually think of like, what's the difference between like observational experience versus like a hands-on experience? Because I think in theater, it's really easy to just have someone literally just shadow a whole process, which sometimes can, and sometimes it can feel weird to just be like, have someone just like watching everything you do. But if that's how that person learns best, then you have to honor that. Because forcing someone to do hands-on things when that might not be what they want can be a huge deterrent. So I just think in a very fast-paced world, I think that's a particular thing to acknowledge too. And then when we're talking about setting expectations, it feeds back into that self-awareness loop, because this is where you establish feedback of how you're doing as a supervisor as well. Because in the best case of that conversation, you say, how am I doing as a supervisor or leader? And then you're learning right there. Because I think, again, that's the best kind of relationship, is someone reflects something back to you that you didn't know about yourself, and it's important for you to know. So.
Yeah. And I think that I love what Sadie said earlier about the power dynamic, right? Because there's an inherent power dynamic when you're maybe supervising, or you're, in the hierarchy, you may appear to be above an individual, right? There's inherent power, and with that, it's hard for the individual to come forward unless they're given the opportunity. So if you don't open the door to say, how am I doing? Are you getting what you need? Are you learning in the way you need to? If you don't open that door, it's going to be really challenging for the individual to bring it up. But if you provide them that opportunity, it's going to feel like a better learning experience for both you and the individual.
I also think that's another reason why you carve out time ahead of time, so you know when those conversations are going to happen. Because sometimes when it's like, oh, well, rehearsal ended early, let's do a check-in, might not be the best way to prepare for those kinds of things. Because if someone does have something that they have been, stewing on, or maybe they have a question or something, knowing that you have time set aside, I think, to reiterate what Mandy says, opens the door for people to feel more confident when you have that kind of inherent power dynamic at times. So I wanted to just put a couple questions out there in terms of like, what are just good like boilerplate questions to just like get any conversation started. Because living in a world of HR and interview questions, I'm like, let's write the questions down so I don't forget them. And then that's great. But I think, I think there's just inherent basic get to know you things. Because you're gonna spend time with this person, you should just like inherently get to know them. And I think some of these we've kind of already touched on in our conversation, but what would you like to learn out of this experience? Do you know your best learning style? And I think there's different ways that you can phrase these questions too, depending on how, you want to, have that conversation inherently. And I think kind of the flip side of learning styles is, how do you receive information? I think that that's a really important one as well. Because I think especially in this world where we can, on my phone, I can get calls, emails, text message, Facebook, probably 3 other ways that people can get a hold of me, right? And like, I think it's important to like understand, how are we going to talk with each other? Like, don't call me after 10, text me after 10 or something like that. So, I
really like, Sadie, this idea of like, when you're talking about learning styles and you're talking about, are you a social learner or a solitary learner? I think also in this, recognizing that a production could be that sort of time-bound project, the individual may want to start out early on, just like with that observational learning. Like, I just want to learn and listen because I haven't been maybe in the rehearsal room before, or I haven't done this before. But then they might start to build confidence. And so they might come to you and that might shift a little, right? They might want to be more hands-on. So I think it's being able to like help them grow within that project too. And maybe take some stuff on as the confidence level builds.
And I think another thing you just touched on, Mandy, is like in a best case scenario, someone's growing in the process and things might change. And I think that sometimes someone doesn't know what they want to learn until maybe they're partway through it too. So that's where I think some of these questions can help someone think about things they haven't thought about before, because someone may not have ever thought of how do I like to receive information, because they just might not have ever thought about it, right? But I think that that's also part of the learning, is getting people to think differently, right? And to be able to, again, pass that kind of self-awareness on to that person so that they can then be a better, you know, leader, supervisor, hopefully someday too. I just have to throw out one example of a project that I worked on with this how do you receive information, because I had a class project once where I was like, oh, we'll just like email everything, and literally everyone else in the group was like, no, we'll just have a text group. And I wanted to die, because I was like, we're organizing a project through text messages, and I was like, okay, I know that this is going to go against my grain, but this is what the group wants. And so like, to me, that was like a shining example of like, I know that this will run me on fumes to communicate a whole project on text message, but if that's what the group needs, that's what our expectation is, and here we go. So I was like, I must be old, I want everything on email. So
yes, I feel you there. I think working in a remote environment, which I'm sure we have all been doing maybe a taste of in the last year, and just that like shift to written communication in ways that we maybe have not communicated before, right, is definitely new and not for everybody. Definitely not for everybody.
And then just a couple other questions. How do you like to receive feedback? What are you most concerned about in this process? Because I think it's easy to focus on what are you always excited about, but I think it's also good to hear, like, do you have concerns? Because like someone might be, you know, anxious about something, and that would inform how you supervise them. Because I think if you're not aware that they have certain anxieties about something, it might compound them. There's things you can do to alleviate the anxieties, different things like that. What are you most excited about? What's your time commitment and availability? And then observational versus hands-on. Those are all just kind of good boilerplate questions to hopefully springboard into some other questions as well, so that as you're getting to know someone, these can just kind of be go-to things that you can always look at. Does anyone have any other questions that they like to ask or anything like that? I am certain I did not think of all of the great questions that exist in the world. Maybe I did, and YouTube will come up with the feedback. So on to some specific
YouTube comments.
The YouTube comments. Actually, I do hope the YouTube comments create what other good questions are good opener questions.
Put your
So
Yes.
just a couple of like designer and director specific. When you start drilling down into like director, you know, I think you can start getting to specifics of like, how do you see your role in the rehearsal room? What is your goal in directing, and how do you see this project helping you towards that goal? Why do you think this is an important story to tell? Because again, sometimes the open-ended questions, you get more out of it just by asking the question, that can help inform the overall arc of the relationship with someone as well. How would you describe your current directing style? What's the largest production you've worked on before? Do you have other areas of interest in the theater? And are you comfortable maybe running scenes, on your own without me? I think, that's just a couple of questions if you're working with like an assistant director to help open up, you get to know them better, and it can dovetail right into how are we actually going to make this production work. And then I think with designers, one thing I ask of all my assistants is how do you want to communicate with the rest of the production team? Because I've had kind of different scenarios where someone is copied on something and they're just like copied just as equal as me on conversations. I've had some assistants that are like, nope, just tell me what you want. I don't need to talk to anyone else. And I'm like, okay, that's fine too. But I think that kind of comes back to what does that experience want to be for you? Are you more interested in the design concept or the execution? Is there a specific skill you're looking to work on or improve in this process? That's a question I always ask in every kind of production, because that's going to be my best way to figure out, if that's what they want to work on, can I find something in this production to help them improve that? And I love it when design assistants are like, I want to paint better. And I'm like, great, there's always work with that. So, and then, what is your goal in designing and how do you see this project helping towards that? And how do you describe your current design process? And then for both areas, always plan ahead for tech. So in terms of like who's taking notes and who's like physically being there. Because I think in some situations, I've had an assistant where like I didn't have to be there because the assistant was there, right? Which is great. And then I've had some situations where the assistant is like, I've been painting all day, I will not be at tech. And I'm like, that's great too. So I think, Tech Week is always its kind of own particular thing to kind of tease out in terms of setting expectations as well. That was a lot of me talking. Mandy, I'm sure you have thoughts at this point.
I have so many thoughts, Sadie, all the time. I also want to learn how to paint better. But I think these are good questions to Sadie's point to like set the stage, set expectations again early and often, and then you might think of better questions as you go, or even as you build rapport with the individual, right? So you're going to learn them, their style, what they're hoping to get out of, and hopefully be able to dig in a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. And next we're going to get into the difference between mentoring, coaching, and delegating, because I think it's really easy to kind of conflate those terms, but I usually think of them as different concepts, kind of depending on the given circumstances. So mentoring, I usually think of as a mentee-led process. So usually you have a mentee that is looking to be mentored or looking for a mentor. So it's usually someone saying, I'm looking for this in some kind of personal growth. And there's kind of a longer term arc to that. Mandy, what do you have to add about mentoring?
Yeah, I think to that point, I think the fact that it's coming out from the individual, right? There's the self-awareness and recognition. I want to grow, and maybe it is as a designer, as a director, as an individual. So it doesn't have to be like within model building. It can be a little bit more big picture, just knowing that you want to develop those skills and you're looking for someone who's been doing this, who might be able to give some guidance and help you there. But again, it's like driven by the mentee. The mentee has the sort of goals in mind and is probably the one seeking out that relationship most likely. And again, that could look different in a different environment, but I think in this one's especially, it's the mentee seeking out that mentor to help them develop and grow.
Mm-hmm. And then we get to coaching. And I think with coaching, there's always kind of like the visual of like sports, where you always kind of just have that visual of like, there's kind of like the supervisor that is kind of leading that person towards some kind of improvement or development or self-growth. So there's usually like specific objectives to achieve in like a coaching situation, which I think can be a little bit easier. That kind of style marries a little bit better with kind of production work. I know I'm just thinking of myself where I've had to like coach different assistants through like paint techniques and like, no, I promise you will be able to do this. It just takes a little bit of practice. And I think, yeah, Mandy, what do you have to add?
Yeah, and I think for, when I think about it, especially in the business world, again, like a coach is probably somebody that we use them a lot for leadership development, right? So like we need you to develop as a leader. Maybe you were an amazing individual contributor. You were great in your role, it maybe as an IT data entry person, and now suddenly you're leading a team and you need someone to help you develop those skills. So it might not be you making that decision. It might be, we've got this need, or maybe you're on a production and Sadie's the expert. She's like, I promise, listen to my coaching and you're going to get to the finish line. So it's probably a little bit more of a collaborative back and forth than in that mentee-mentor relationship where you're sort of driving some of those end goals. This is definitely much more like, okay, I want to do this. And the coach is the expert. They're the subject matter expert and they're going to help you get there. And sometimes you're just going to have to listen, which can be hard, right? And but in there comes some of the growth.
And I think sometimes when I think of the times when I've had to coach someone, that those are the times that I, as the supervisor or leader, really have to exercise my skills of like, okay, the way I described that didn't land. So what do I need to do to describe this differently? Or like, no, I know this person's learning style. I know they can do this. What do I need to do to get them to that point? That's where I feel like I'm exercising my skills of like, I know how to do this. How can I explain this differently to get this person to that point as well? So sometimes I think in coaching, you like really like as a manager, like there's just times where you can be like, I don't know why I don't get this, but I guess we got to keep going. But I think that's sometimes when it's also most fulfilling, because that's when you can really see your own skill set, like really stretching and flexing to be like, actually, I learned something because I had to explain that differently. So
Yeah.
Speaking from like data entry projects and painting projects, it is the same skill set regardless of whatever you're coaching on. So,
Yes.
and then I think that there's additionally delegating. And I think delegating, inherently, like you do have to delegate to get tasks done. So it's a little bit more tied to like the management side of things rather than more like the leadership kind of visioning, conceptualizing kinds of things. But I think delegating is quite a skill, right, Mandy?
It is such a skill, let me tell you. And I have not met the perfect delegator, myself included, because I think it's you have to exercise that muscle. And if we think about like a mentee relationship being really more holistic, overall growth and development, coaching being really maybe more specific to skill set or maybe job growth or a specific area that you want to improve, delegating is the process by which we can get there, right? So it's letting go of those tasks and saying, I'm going to give you exactly the tools you need to do this well, but not micromanage. And that is a hard balance. I feel like, it takes time and it takes practice. It takes flexing the muscle to give the tools for folks to be successful. I have a manager right now who she's struggling because there's so much. And she's like, I know I need to delegate to my team, but I can't carve out the time to do it well. Because it does take time to sit down and think, okay, I'm going to give this to this person because I know they can do it. And I'm going to give them the right information. Here's what you need to do by this date in this manner. Like it takes time. And I think you just have to be really disciplined, which is what Sadie said earlier about something like you just have to hold yourself accountable to letting go of tasks, making the time to give the person what they need to do it. Not just throwing it at them and not overly micromanaging. And those are sort of the extremes, right? But we all fall somewhere in between there.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in theater, people that are good at doing the thing can sometimes get promoted to the supervisory position. And maybe I'm just like generalizing that to theater because I like mostly know theater kinds of environments. So Mandy, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that just because that you're good at the thing doesn't necessarily mean you'll be good at delegating the thing.
Right.
And so I think particularly in a lot of situations where if you have, as a manager, are used to doing the thing, that's where you really feel the skill of letting go in
Oh.
practice. If you've been doing it and then you're, kind of brought up to then supervising it, you're like, no, but I know what needs to get done. And it's like, yeah, you gotta let that go so that you can supervise that. So
Yes, that's spot on. And I think it's true everywhere. There's so many of my lovely IT individuals who are like, I'm really good at the thing. I'm just gonna do the thing. I'm like, but now you've got a team of people that want to do the thing. And if you don't give them the thing, then they're actually going to think that you don't trust them. And then they're going to be in my office. So let's talk about like giving them the thing. And that can be hard, especially if you love the thing, right? If you're like, but I'm really good at painting and this is what I really love. I'm like, yes, awesome. Is there a way for you to like step back and do that, but also hand it over to someone, so that they can do the thing? And it takes practice. I'm not gonna lie. It just takes doing it, learning from it, doing it again. It's kind of that iterative process.
But isn't it true that it's not always a natural progression? Just because you're good at the thing doesn't mean you're going to be good at managing doing the thing.
No. And it's a skill set. Like managing is very different from doing.
Yes.
Like you can't just promote
rising
folks
to the level of their incompetence. And so it's recognizing if you're trying to move people forward, you also have to realize where they fit the best. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That skill gap that I've got a CFO I've worked with who I love, and he did not do all the, like, he's like, I haven't done AP, AR, payroll, all these pieces of finance, but he's an incredible supervisor because he knows just enough to like understand that it's hard, but he's like, I don't want to do it. I want you to do it. And you want you to teach me. And it's like it's a brilliant sort of supervisory skill set.
Yeah.
That's really important.
My Phoebe is barking, so there's gonna be barking on the recording. But for me, that kind of difference between like supervising and doing the thing clicked in college. So I'm lucky that it clicked young for me, because I had a day, because I was lead paint on a show. This was actually like sophomore year of college, so this was like young. And I remember having a paint call, and it was literally like a 9 to 5 Saturday paint call, because it was like the Saturday before tech. So like I knew that I was going to have a lot of people in. And I remember about halfway through the day, because I like literally had like 8 or 10 people painting. And like that was like truly like a mix of people of like, God bless them, musical theater people painting scenic work, and then my actual like skilled technicians. And I remember like halfway through the call, I was like, oh my God, I have not painted at all. What am I doing? But then I was like, you're keeping 10 people busy.
Mhm.
That's way better than just you painting yourself. And that was the moment for me where I'm like, if I can get 10 people to paint instead of just me paint and have them enjoy it, that's the ultimate, right? So that was kind of for me the moment that it clicked, is like literally I was in the middle of a paint call and I was like, I haven't picked up a brush today. So, but delegating. And then additionally, I think particularly in theater work, I think it's important to take advantage of your network in a couple of different ways, because you inherently can't learn everything in one show. So someone might be interested in something where you're like, oh, well, that is just like, right off the bat, you're like, that is just not happening in this production. But I know someone that you can have a conversation with and get that ball rolling. I'm just thinking about like specific like period pieces where like an assistant might be interested in something where it's like, I might be good, but I am not that good to be able to teach you that in this production. So I think being able to connect people outside, your assistant with people outside of the production is a really good skill set as well. When you're thinking of like, how am I helping this person not only in this show, but also with their network and with their career as well? Because networking is a skill set in and of itself as well, which is like a different presentation in and of itself.
It's
Mandy,
such a
you have
skill set.
thoughts.
I have so many thoughts. It's such a skill set. I was in this great, we were doing, I was volunteering with this organization that does workforce development to get folks into Salesforce, because it can be a really like challenging ecosystem. If you don't know, Salesforce is a large CRM, enterprise-wide technology platform. And there's this organization that's trying to get folks in the door, especially people of color, folks who maybe didn't graduate college, individuals from underrepresented communities. And so I was sitting on this volunteer event the other night, virtually, as we all have been doing. And the woman running it says, I want everybody who has gotten a job because of someone they know to put your name in the chat. It was, I kid you not, 95% of folks there got opportunities because of their network and who they knew, and just like staying connected with people, 95%. And so when we think about how do we provide opportunities for folks who are newer to the space, who are eager, who want to break into this, a lot of that is just like sending them opportunities, keeping folks engaged, helping them with their network, helping yourself with your network. Who knows when it's going to come back and benefit you, right? Like they might go on, develop, engage, get all of this stuff, and they might provide opportunities back. So it is such a critical piece. And I think if you can help provide opportunities for folks, like that is just an amazing feeling and just a wonderful thing to be able to do.
And I think in the most like literal sense with theater work, it is literally just sending an email. Like it's so easy to do. Cause like I know I've had some assistants where like when I'm talking with them, I'm like, okay, I gotta send 5 emails tonight. Gotta check that box, make sure I do that. And it's literally just sending 5 emails, right? Like that is nothing compared to like when you, and Mandy, you're talking about the impact of that and how that then helps you then as well, because you're strengthening your network inherently as well.
Yeah.
Because you're helping opportunities with everyone in that instance. So anything else about networking, Mandy?
Good question. I think, for folks, networking looks different when we talk about those like learning styles or even preferences. When you think about individuals who might be less of an extrovert or maybe even not as comfortable in large groups, like thinking about ways that they can network one-on-one or like send written communication for opportunities, like just figuring out how networking can look differently and helping folks kind of build up that skill set and the confidence and the comfort to be able to do it well, again, is such a skill and a whole separate training that could last hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've had some assistants where I'm like, here's the email, figure it out. And then I've had some where I'm like, make sure you ask these 3 questions of this person, because I know you need to get this out of this conversation. And that's kind of like, you got to know your assistant a little bit, that goes a little bit back to like the mentoring and coaching aspect of things too, because like, I know some of my assistants, earlier, might not know what questions to ask, because sometimes that's the difficult thing, to know what questions to ask. So if you can, again, provide the questions to help spark that, it's all related. All of the slides are all related. So, well, that is all of our slides. So that gets us to the question portion of this. Does anyone have any questions? Anything we didn't cover in these slides that you would like to hear more about? Well, both Mandy and I are on the same call again together.
Get together, different time zones, same Zoom.
Right.
I'd be curious too if folks have had any, occurrence or situations where they've either been the person supervised or they themselves are supervising and it hasn't gone well. Like, do you have any thoughts about like, oh my gosh, this happened, what should I have done, could I have done, or thinking back on this, here's what I maybe should have done, anything that.
And we can stop the recording at that point too. I can.
I forgot we were recording.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stop the recording then. There it goes.